Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session on mental and spiritual distress around a pandemic. My name is Fawcett. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist. I'm the connectional psychologist for the candidating process for the Methodist Church, and also director of psychosocial services for Thrive Worldwide, which looks after the mental and physical health of missionaries, aid workers, church workers in 250 organisations around the world. And it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. So COVID-19, we've now thoroughly experienced the first wave in the United Kingdom, and we'll remember that that was characterised by increased worry or anxiety, accompanied by very much of a gung-ho can-do attitude. We will get through this, and a lot of that was because we were promised that it would probably be over by September 2020. It wasn't, and so we had wave 2. We're in the midst of that at the moment, although there's been a couple of ups and downs, and it's beginning to look like we are, certainly by the time you see this broadcast, we'll be well through it. This is characterised by a different kind of feeling. It's more to do with something we call learned helplessness. And learned helplessness is that phenomenon where we've done everything we possibly can, and no matter what we do, the outcome is bad or toxic. And so there is that sense of we did everything we could, we were reasonably well behaved, and yet COVID came back. What more do you want from us? And there's that sense of being fed up, of giving up, of not being able to do very much, a slight sense of despondency. And we'll go into a different phase, which I'll outline in a few moments. There's also a paradoxical eat, drink, be merry, which we saw around Christmas, people desperately wanting some Christmas festivity. And we're also seeing it in the way in which people still want, in very small pockets, to celebrate. But primarily, we're fed up at the moment. There's also a phenomenon around called long COVID, which affects a small number of people who have COVID symptoms. It's by no means affects everybody, but it does affect some. It looks like there are 4 separate phenomena here. Something to do with lung function, which is compromised, which can lead to longer term problems. A sense of fatigue, which can also linger, although it's unlikely to linger much beyond 12 weeks. A long-term physical impact on the heart, and then something people are calling brain fog. It's this inability to think properly, to think our way through things, to follow the train of thought, to follow what is going on around us. And we can just feel that our intellect is not behaving the way it ought to. All of these, as far as we can see, are time limited, particularly when it comes to fatigue or brain fog. And the suspicion is it's mainly due to inflammation, which takes a while to go away. We don't know that for sure yet, and the science is still coming in. And the rates overall for per 100 to 1,000 of people being affected by COVID are very low. Because so many people have been affected by COVID, there are still quite a large number of people within the UK, and so NHS services are being established to help deal with that. So as the vaccination comes, and as the impact of COVID begins to wane, which it would do naturally, particularly as spring begins to gather pace, we're now in something we call the third quarter phenomenon. And this is it's something that comes upon us when we start saying things like there's light at the end of a tunnel, and we've been in a confined space or unable to move freely. A lot of us may have experienced it on long haul flights from here to Australia, or here to the Far East, or here to Los Angeles, where we get towards the end of the flight. It's clear the flight is beginning to come to an end, and all we want to do is to get off. So there's that sense of, I want this to stop. And it's leading to people being somewhat more antsy, short-tempered, nerves are a bit more frayed, People have less tolerance for one another. There's more and more experience of short-term memory problems, word finding difficulties, etc. And this is being experienced quite universally at the moment. There'll also be, for some of us, some well-ingrained habits. We're used now to swerving around people when we go outside, possibly taking more note and being more cautious around people who are wearing masks, not wearing masks at all, or wearing them poorly. And so we tend to engage in these safety behaviours where we feel it's less safe to go out than it might have been in the past. And we are certainly very concerned about going back into closed buildings such as offices, pubs, restaurants, etc. There's also a phenomenon at the moment where enduring mental health conditions, paradoxically for some people, these may be improving. They have to encounter fewer people, so there's less stress in their lives. And so the result there is that they feel better. For others, there's an uptick in generalized anxiety, depression, sometimes trauma symptoms, and these can be worsening at this stage. And people are worried about this enduring beyond the end of lockdowns. And then there's thinking about our different lifestyles once lockdown does come to an end. And as we get towards the end of this pandemic over the coming years, we need to bear in mind that the World Health Organization is modeling the pandemic around the world through 2024. This isn't going to be something that just goes away quickly. We do need to be conscious of it for some years to come. But nevertheless, some new normals will begin to emerge. Will we all go back to the office, to church, to factories? Or will we all stay at home and do everything virtually as we have been so far? Or will there be some sort of hybrid approach to what is going on? And at the moment, our reading of the situation is that it'll be more of a hybrid approach, that there'll be an increase in home working, and and people will be less asking, why should people work at home? And more be asking, why exactly should people come to an expensive office, which is quite expensive to maintain? And in that, why would they want to commute and lose half an hour, 2 or 3 hours a day, just to go from one location to another with no particular advantage? There are huge advantages to being together in offices, factories, schools, colleges, and so on. But that needs to be worked out over these coming months. So amongst caregivers, and by this I include ministers and those in caring or support roles, are at significantly increased risk at the moment of experiencing mental health issues. We're seeing in particular reduced control and more helplessness amongst carers and caregivers, leading to burnout. The impact of COVID has been remorseless. It has gone on and on and on and on, and people are getting to the end of themselves within that. There's also, particularly amongst caregivers and those very much on the front line in the National Health Service and in care homes, we're seeing an increase, a dramatic increase in trauma-like symptoms. I'm hesitant to call it full-on PTSD. But it seems to be arising from something we call moral injury. A moral injury is when you are forced to face a set of decisions, neither decision being good. And you are forced to choose between the worst decision and the least worst decision, but they're all bad. And many healthcare workers have been faced with this continually. Ministers are being faced with this as they support families who have said goodbye to their loved ones. They've been whisked off to hospital on their own. Sometimes they forget their phone, although that's less common now. And then they effectively die alone on Facebook, on FaceTime, etc. And these very difficult situations then have to be handled by ministers and other caregivers. Isolation has increased, and we know that isolation is bad for our mental health. We are social creatures. We like to be around each other. And so the sense of isolation has been increased, and with that, a lot of mental health conditions have begun to bubble up, not necessarily reaching full criteria for depression with a capital D or anxiety, but we are all feeling the impact of not being around other people and the day-to-day banter that we have with each other. Over the last year, the theology of the church across all denominations has been compromised. How do you pastor? Jesus said, lay hands on the sick. He didn't say wave at them from a distance over Zoom. And so these small acts of kindness and mercy, which ministers and other lay workers have been used to providing, have not been able to be provided. And that has created significant tension within ministers and other workers. And then, of course, the big question, how to do church. We've become quite good now at doing church virtually, and many ministers have been surprised that their sermons now reach more people than they ever would do on a Sunday morning sometimes. But increasingly we are now asking the question, do we do church in a church building? Do we do it completely remotely? Do we do it in a hybrid fashion? Now that we've discovered that older people can actually use things like Zoom, things like FaceTime and so on, we're beginning to think through a little bit more. What is the value added of having small groups meeting on a Thursday evening in November when there's snow and ice outside, when we can do this equally well on Zoom? A little while ago, my own church had a missions evening, and we invited a missionary. It was done entirely on Zoom, and it's going to be two presenters. One was up in Scotland, and one was down in Kent. My home church is in Bedfordshire, and the meeting went ahead. The person from Scotland didn't have to travel. The person from Kent didn't have to travel. It was a very, very vibrant and fascinating 1.5 hours together on Zoom, with time for questions, meaningful questions at the end, to which 60, 70 people turned up. Ordinarily, I don't know about your missions evenings, if you can get 10 or 15 people to turn out, you're often doing well. So we're beginning to discover the value of virtual church, but are unwilling to go over to virtual church completely. So these questions about how to do church are very vibrant and live at the moment. So amongst the population, we can see an increase in our intensity of feelings of anxiety, sadness, insomnia, irritability. There is a definite increase in serious mental health conditions in NHS and care home staff. Recent research, but we're still running the numbers, doesn't show an increase in suicide completion, but there is very definitely an increase in suicidal thinking amongst people. And there is no increase in severe mental health issues, by which I mean psychosis, bipolar, etc. Those are running at about the usual rates. The key thing for this session, however, is that there is a striking increase in safeguarding concerns across all categories of safeguarding, whether that is child, adult, domestic violence, and including some of the things that we're becoming much more aware of now, including radicalisation, particularly right-wing radicalisation is becoming more and more of a problem as events have spiralled more out of control over the last year or so. The drumbeat underneath all of this is something we're calling the 3 U's, which is uncertainty, unpredictability, uncontrollability. And if you put any human being into a situation where they feel uncertain about the future, that the future can't be predicted, fundamentally can't be predicted, and that the life is out of control, then people are going to experience a significant increase in anxiety and other symptoms. And our role within the church is to provide environment spaces where the 3 U's are reduced somewhat, the edge is taken off them. Can't eliminate them, we're in a pandemic, but we can take the edge off these experiences and think how to provide church in a way which addresses uncertainty, unpredictability and uncontrollability. And so the priorities for church ministry and for church HQs at the moment is not to think in terms of timetables and schedules, but more to think in terms of routines and rhythms. How do we manage ourselves during the day, during the week? What does Sabbath look like? How do we mark that? How do we mark the seasons within the church? By the time of this broadcast, we'll be into Lent. How do we do that virtually? And these are important. We just do a thought experiment at the moment. Most of you will be able to give me one or two examples of what you did a year ago in January. Virtually none of you will be able to tell me what you did a year ago in April or May. Our sense of time has become very distorted, and we've lost those routine markers that help us mark the passage of time, where we are in time, how much time has passed, how much time is to come. And so we're very lost in the midst of this passage of time at the moment, which both seems to be paradoxically very fast. The days are rushing past. Suddenly we're at the end of another week, another month. And yet at the same time, going very slowly. When will it be over? A key function within our churches at the moment is to counter loneliness. Loneliness is the lead indicator for premature death and for depression and anxiety, particularly amongst older people. But it's also a lead indicator for people of any age. And so anything we can do to enhance fellowship is crucial. At this particular time, providing a message of hope is crucial for the church as well. Not an artificial hope, but a realistic hope based in our relationship with God, but also in a reasonable certainty that things are going to move on and this too shall pass. And then to encourage gratitude. This is one of the lead indicators for proper mental health in a positive sense of the word. The more we can experience gratitude, perhaps joy, in the midst of our lives, irrespective of the circumstances, the more likely we are to make this through in a reasonably good condition.